Marcus Chen settled into the plush seat of the luxury space liner, grateful for a moment of anonymity. After years of diplomatic missions across the galaxy, being recognized everywhere, he had become exhausting. Today, dressed in simple civilian clothes instead of his formal ambassador attire, he hoped to enjoy the journey in peace. The soft hum of the ship's engines had just begun to lull him into relaxation when a shadow fell across his face. He looked up to find a flight attendant staring down at him, her expression a mix of suspicion and disapproval. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice carrying just enough volume for nearby passengers to hear. "I believe you're in the wrong section." Marcus blinked, momentarily confused. "I'm sorry. This is first class." The attendant, Ilara, according to her name badge, explained slowly, as if speaking to a child. "Economy seating is toward the rear of the vessel." Around them, the first-class cabin fell silent. Marcus felt every passenger's gaze burning into his back. His military medals were safely tucked in his luggage, his ambassador credentials deliberately kept private for this journey. For once, he had wanted to travel as just another person. "There must be a mistake," Marcus said quietly, reaching into his pocket and holding up his ticket. "Seat 3A is mine." Ilara barely glanced at the ticket before her lips tightened into a thin line. "I don't care what that says. You clearly don't belong here." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marcus had faced this before, on Earth, on colony worlds, even in diplomatic circles. The assumption that his dark skin somehow made him less worthy, less important, less entitled to occupy certain spaces. A wealthy couple seated across the aisle whispered to each other, their eyes darting between Marcus's casual clothes and his face. The woman clutched her expensive handbag closer, while the man's expression hardened with unwarranted suspicion. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." Marcus tried again, his diplomat's training keeping his voice level despite the familiar sting of prejudice. "If you check your passenger manifest." "Sir," Ilara interrupted, "I've asked you politely. Please gather your belongings and move to economy class where you belong." An older businessman 2 rows ahead turned to stare openly now, not bothering to hide his curiosity at the unfolding scene. A young family with children had fallen awkwardly silent, parents exchanging uncomfortable glances. "I paid for this seat," Marcus stated firmly. "I have no intention of moving." Ilara's professional smile turned cold. Without breaking eye contact, she reached for the communication device clipped to her uniform. "Security to first class, please," she called into her comm, smiling thinly. "We have an uncooperative passenger who needs to be escorted to his proper seating." Marcus remained calm, though his heart raced. He had negotiated peace treaties with hostile alien species, yet here he was, being treated like an intruder on a human vessel. The irony wasn't lost on him. 2 security officers appeared within minutes, their uniforms crisp and their expressions stern. They approached Marcus's seat with practiced caution. "Sir," the taller guard began, "we need you to." He was interrupted by the sound of the cockpit door sliding open. The captain emerged, datapad in hand, likely drawn by the unusual request for security in first class during boarding. The captain's eyes swept over the scene, landing on Marcus. His expression transformed from professional concern to shock, then embarrassment. "Ambassador Chen," the captain said, his voice carrying clearly throughout the cabin. "Is there a problem here?" A ripple of murmurs spread through the first-class cabin. Several passengers straightened in their seats, recognition dawning on their faces. Ilara's face drained of color as she realized who Marcus really was. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The security officers immediately stepped back, their postures shifting from authoritative to deferential. "Captain," Marcus acknowledged with a slight nod, maintaining his dignity despite the humiliation of the past few minutes. "There seems to be some confusion about my seating assignment." The captain turned to Ilara, whose complexion had now taken on an ashen quality. "Ms. Ilara, Ambassador Chen is not only authorized for first class, but as our most distinguished passenger, he should have been personally welcomed aboard. Marcus watched as the reality of her mistake settled on Ilara's shoulders. In that moment, he saw not just embarrassment, but the dawning horror of someone who had just insulted one of the most powerful humans in galactic politics, the man who had negotiated peace with 3 hostile alien species and who was now on his way to represent humanity at the Galactic Council. The wealthy couple who had been whispering now looked mortified. The businessman who had been staring quickly averted his eyes, and Ilara stood frozen, her career seemingly crumbling before her eyes. "You're the one who negotiated the Proxima Peace Treaty." Ilara's voice trembled as security backed away. Her hands shook slightly as the full weight of her mistake became clear. The Ambassador Chen, hero of 3 interstellar conflicts, and the diplomat who had single-handedly prevented war with the Proxima Coalition. The captain stepped forward, his posture stiff with formal respect. "Ambassador Chen, I apologize profusely for this incident. Ms. Ilara is new to interstellar routes and clearly failed to review our VIP passenger list." He shot a withering glance at the flight attendant, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. Around them, the first-class cabin had transformed. Passengers who moments ago had watched with suspicious eyes now leaned forward eagerly, comm devices ready to capture images of the famous ambassador. The wealthy couple who had whispered about Marcus now smiled broadly, clearly hoping to catch his attention. Marcus didn't reply immediately. 3 wars and countless diplomatic missions had taught him patience. He remembered being denied entry to military academies despite top scores, overlooked for promotions despite exemplary service, questioned at every achievement, as if someone with his background couldn't possibly have earned such honors. This moment on the ship was just another version of a scene he had lived through many times before. The security officers stood awkwardly to the side, uncertain whether to leave or stay. Ilara's face had gone from pale to flushed with shame, her eyes fixed on the floor. The captain waited, clearly expecting Marcus to demand immediate consequences. "No termination needed," he finally said, his voice calm and measured. The relief that flashed across Ilara's face was immediate and obvious. But Marcus wasn't finished. "But I'd like Ms. Ilara assigned as my personal attendant for this journey." Ilara's relief quickly changed to horror. Her eyes widened as she realized what this meant. Hours of direct service to a man she had just humiliated in front of a cabin full of people. "That's highly unusual, Ambassador," the captain said carefully. "We would be happy to assign our most experienced staff to." "Ms. Ilara will be fine," Marcus interrupted smoothly. "I'm sure she'll provide excellent service now that we've cleared up this misunderstanding." The captain nodded stiffly. "Of course, Ambassador. Ms. Ilara, you are reassigned effective immediately." He turned to the security officers. "You may return to your stations." As the crowd dispersed and passengers returned to their own business, albeit with frequent glances toward Marcus, Ilara stood frozen beside his seat. "Would you like a drink, Ambassador?" she finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not at the moment, thank you," Marcus replied, pulling out his data tablet. "I'll call if I need anything." The next 3 hours passed in uncomfortable silence. Marcus reviewed diplomatic briefings while Ilara hovered nearby, jumping at his smallest movement. When he finally called her over, she approached with the caution of someone nearing a dangerous animal. "Yes, Ambassador Chen. I'd like some tea, please. Whatever blend you recommend for focusing on complex negotiations." Ilara nodded quickly and hurried away, grateful for the simple task. When she returned with a steaming cup of amber liquid, her hands were steadier, though her eyes still couldn't quite meet his. "It's Centaurian black leaf with a touch of earth jasmine," she explained, setting the cup carefully on his tray. "Many diplomats favor it before important meetings." Marcus nodded his thanks and took a sip. The blend was excellent. Perhaps Ilara did know her job after all, when not blinded by prejudice. "May I ask you something, Ms. Ilara?" Marcus said quietly. She tensed but nodded. "Of course, sir." Why did you assume I didn't belong in first class? The direct question caught her off guard. I'm not sure what you mean, sir. I think you are, Marcus replied, his voice firm but not unkind. Was it my clothes, my appearance, or something else entirely? Ilara's discomfort was palpable. I made a terrible mistake. It won't happen again. That's not an answer, Marcus observed, but perhaps honesty is too much to expect so soon. He returned to his tablet, and Ilara retreated to her station at the front of the cabin. As the journey continued, Marcus noticed her watching him with a mix of fear and curiosity. When he requested her assistance with minor tasks, she performed them flawlessly, her professional training evident despite her earlier behavior. Later, as she nervously brought him a fresh cup of tea before the ship's transition to faster-than-light travel, Marcus decided to break the uncomfortable silence. "Have you ever met a Krelzar pirate, Ilara?" he asked casually. The question startled her. "No, sir," she whispered, clearly confused by the sudden shift in conversation. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Let's hope you never do. They're not known for their hospitality to humans, regardless of status or appearance." Just as the words left his mouth, a deafening siren cut through the cabin. Red warning lights began flashing throughout the ship, and the vessel shuddered violently. Passengers cried out in alarm as the space liner lurched to one side. "Let's hope you never do," he had said, just as the ship's alarm began to wail. The explosion rocked the ship violently, sending passengers and crew tumbling across the luxurious first-class cabin. The lights flickered and dimmed as the emergency systems engaged. Oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments, swinging wildly with the ship's unsteady movements. "Pirates!" someone shouted from the back of the cabin, their voice tight with panic. A child began to cry. An older man near the viewport pointed with a trembling finger at the sleek, predatory shapes of smaller vessels approaching through the darkness of space. The captain's voice came over the intercom, strained and broken by static. "This is Captain Reeves. We've been hit. Krelzar boarding party. All passengers remain. Security protocols." His voice cut out mid-sentence, replaced by a burst of static and then silence. The terrifying quiet lasted only seconds before chaos erupted. Passengers scrambled from their seats, some rushing toward the exits, others frozen in fear. A woman in an expensive suit clutched her neck where her jewels had been moments before, eyes wide with shock. Marcus remained perfectly still for 3 heartbeats, his diplomat's mind assessing the situation with practiced calm. Then he moved with surprising speed for a man known primarily for his words rather than actions. As the ship lurched again, Ilara stumbled forward, nearly falling. Marcus grabbed her arm, steadying her with a strength she hadn't expected. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice cutting through her fear. "I need your help." Ilara stared at him, her earlier prejudice momentarily forgotten in the face of immediate danger. "My help? Why would you trust me?" she asked, terrified, remembering how she had treated him just hours before. "Because right now, your prejudice is less dangerous than those pirates," Marcus said, his expression grave as he pulled a small device from his pocket. The metal object gleamed in the emergency lighting, and because I've faced worse than both. The device in his hand looked military-grade, far more advanced than standard civilian equipment. He pressed his thumb against it, and a holographic display sprang to life, showing what appeared to be the ship's schematics. Ilara watched in shock as the quiet, dignified passenger transformed before her eyes. His posture straightened, shoulders squaring with military precision. His voice, which had been soft and measured during their earlier confrontation, now carried a tone of unmistakable command as he turned to address the frightened passengers. "Everyone stay calm," he ordered, and surprisingly, people listened. "The emergency lockdown protocols will engage soon. When they do, get to your seats and secure yourselves. Do not attempt to leave this cabin until it's safe." A businessman who had been pushing toward the exit stopped. "Who are you to give orders?" he demanded. "He's Ambassador Chen." Someone else answered, recognition in their voice. "The one who negotiated the Proxima Peace Treaty." "I don't care if he's the Earth president," the businessman shot back. "I'm getting off this ship." Marcus stepped forward, blocking his path. "The Krelzar pirates take no prisoners, sir. Your best chance of survival is to follow my instructions." Something in his tone, or perhaps the mention of the notorious Krelzar reputation, made the man back down. Marcus turned back to Ilara, his eyes intense. "The Krelzar will kill everyone unless we reach the auxiliary control room," he explained. "From there, I can activate the ship's defensive systems and send an emergency signal that the standard communications can't manage." "But why me?" Ilara asked, still struggling to understand why he would choose her as an ally after how she had treated him. "Because you know this ship's layout," Marcus replied simply, "and because right now, you have the most to prove." Another explosion rocked the vessel, closer this time. The lights failed completely before emergency illumination paved everything in an eerie red glow. "The Krelzar are boarding," Marcus said grimly. "We have minutes at most. Can you get me there?" Ilara swallowed hard, looking around at the terrified passengers. Among them was the wealthy couple who had whispered about Marcus earlier, now huddled together in fear. The woman caught Ilara's eye, silently pleading for help. Something shifted in Ilara's expression, resolve replacing fear. "Yes," she said firmly. "I know a maintenance route that should avoid the main corridors. Follow me." As they prepared to leave the relative safety of the first-class cabin, Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Stay close and move quickly. The Krelzar won't distinguish between crew and passengers." Ilara nodded, leading him toward a service door at the back of the cabin. As it slid open, revealing a narrow maintenance corridor beyond, she realized that her life, and the lives of everyone aboard, now depended on working with the very man she had tried to humiliate just hours before. "Turn left here," Ilara whispered as they crawled through the maintenance tunnels. The narrow passages were designed for repair drones and occasional human access, forcing them to move on hands and knees. The metal grating bit into Ilara's palms, but she pressed on, leading the way through the dimly lit maze. Behind them, the sounds of pirates tearing through the ship grew louder. Metallic crashes, alien shrieks, and occasional bursts of weapons fire. The Krelzar raiders were known throughout the galaxy for their brutality. They left no survivors, only empty, drifting vessels as silent testaments to their savagery. Sweat trickled down Ilara's back as they navigated another junction. The emergency lighting flickered, casting strange shadows across Marcus's face as he followed close behind her. His features remained calm despite the danger, his breathing steady where hers came in short, frightened bursts. "We're about halfway there," she said, pausing at a small access hatch to check their location against the ship schematics displayed on Marcus's device. "The auxiliary control room is 2 levels down and toward the stern." Marcus nodded, wiping grime from his forehead. "You're doing well," he said quietly. "Better than many soldiers I've known in combat situations." The unexpected praise caught Ilara off guard. After a moment's hesitation, she continued forward, but her mind raced with questions. This man whom she had tried to humiliate was now trusting her with his life, with everyone's lives. "Why did you become a diplomat?" she asked suddenly, needing to break the terrifying silence as much as understand the complicated man behind her. Marcus paused briefly before answering, his voice low. "Because fighting only ends conflicts temporarily," he replied. "Understanding prevents them permanently." "But you were military first, weren't you?" Ilara asked, remembering snippets of news reports about his career. 3 tours during the Proxima conflicts, he confirmed. "I saw enough death to last several lifetimes. Learned that victory through force is often just delayed defeat." They rounded another corner, the passageway widening slightly as they approached a junction where several maintenance shafts converge. The lighting here was better, revealing the fine lines around Marcus's eyes. evidence of stress and experience that his calm demeanor concealed. A sudden crash ahead made them freeze. Metal screeched against metal, followed by guttural voices speaking in the harsh, clicking language of the Krelzar. The sound came from just beyond the next junction, directly in their path. Marcus signaled for silence, motioning Ilara to edge forward with him to peek around the corner. What they saw made her blood run cold. 3 Krelzar warriors stood examining an access panel, their scaled skin glinting under emergency lights. Each stood nearly 7 feet tall, their powerful bodies covered in natural armor-like plates. Curved claws extended from their 4-fingered hands, and their elongated heads featured multiple yellow eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. One of the pirates ripped the access panel from the wall with casual strength, tossing it aside as it searched for valuables, or perhaps hiding passengers. Ilara felt Marcus's breath on her ear as he whispered, "The control room is just beyond them. We have no alternative route." She looked at him in horror, understanding dawning. They would have to somehow get past these killers. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small data chip. "This contains the emergency override codes," he explained in barely a whisper. "You need to get to the control panel and enter this sequence. It will activate the defense systems and send a distress signal with our exact coordinates. I'll distract them," he continued. "When they come after me, you run for the control room." "I can't," Ilara began, terror gripping her chest. "You can," he insisted, his eyes intense. "Your prejudice was about fear. Now face something truly worth fearing." The word struck her like a physical blow. He was right. Her treatment of him had been born from fear of difference, from insecurities she'd never confronted. Now she faced real danger, real monsters. "The code sequence is 7-29 Alpha Echo 0, Marcus said, pressing the chip into her palm. "Don't stop for anything. Not even for me." Before she could protest further, Marcus took a deep breath and moved into action. He grabbed a piece of loose metal from the floor and threw it down a side passage, creating a loud clatter that instantly caught the Krelzar's attention. As the pirates turned toward the noise, Marcus stepped out into the open. "Looking for someone?" he called out, his voice steady and strong. The Krelzar spun around, hissing with surprise and aggression at finding prey so conveniently presenting itself. Marcus turned and ran down a different corridor, the pirates immediately giving chase with terrifying speed. Ilara counted to 5, then darted from their hiding spot toward the control room entrance. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain it would give her away, but the corridor remained empty as she reached the door. As she punched in the emergency access code, a movement caught her eye. Looking back, she saw one of the Krelzar had returned, moving silently toward the junction where Marcus had disappeared. In its clawed hand, it raised a plasma weapon, preparing to fire down the corridor. "Marcus," she screamed, lunging forward without thinking. All thoughts of self-preservation vanished as she threw herself toward the alien, determined to prevent what would certainly be a fatal shot. The rescue ships found them huddled in the auxiliary control room 12 hours after the attack began. The heavy door, designed to withstand deep space emergencies, had protected them from the worst of the Krelzar assault. Marcus Chen, bleeding from a deep shoulder wound, sat propped against the wall, his face pale but composed. Ilara, her once pristine uniform torn and burned in several places, stood guard at the door with a makeshift weapon fashioned from broken equipment. When the rescue team breached the sealed door, weapons ready, they found an unexpected scene. The feared pirates had been defeated not by superior firepower, but by the unlikely partnership of a prejudiced flight attendant and the diplomat she had tried to humiliate. "What happened here?" the rescue team leader asked, surveying the small room with its flashing emergency lights and damaged consoles. "She saved everyone," Marcus told the rescue team, his voice weak but clear. He gestured toward Ilara with his uninjured arm. "Overrode the ship's systems and trapped the pirates in the cargo bay. Then activated the emergency beacon that brought you here." Ilara shook her head. Ambassador Chen is being too generous. He's the one who knew what to do. The truth lay somewhere between their accounts. When Ilara had lunged at the Krulzar warrior aiming at Marcus, she had succeeded only in disrupting its aim. The plasma bolt had struck Marcus in the shoulder instead of the heart. In the confusion, they had managed to reach the control room and seal the doors. I just followed his instructions, Ilara continued, helping the medics as they moved to treat Marcus's wound. After saving my life, Marcus reminded her. And after figuring out how to reroute the ship's atmospheric controls to flood the cargo bay with sedative gas when the pirates regrouped there. The rescue team looked at her with new respect as they heard the full story, how Marcus had provided the security codes, but Ilara's knowledge of the ship's systems had been crucial to implementing their desperate plan. As the medical teams transferred the wounded to the rescue vessels and security personnel took the sedated pirates into custody, passengers gathered to thank their unlikely heroes. The wealthy couple who had whispered about Marcus now asked for pictures with him. The businessman who had questioned his authority shook his hand repeatedly. Later, as medical teams treated the wounded in the rescue ship's infirmary, Ilara approached Marcus hesitantly. His shoulder was bandaged, his arm in a sling, but he sat upright on the examination table, already dictating notes about the incident to his personal device. "Ambassador," she said quietly, waiting until he finished and looked up. "Ilara," he acknowledged with a small nod. "The doctor says you refused treatment until everyone else was seen to. That's admirable." She looked down at her hands, still dirty from the ordeal. "I don't deserve your kindness," she said. "Not after how I treated you when you boarded." Marcus studied her for a long moment. "None of us get what we deserve," he replied finally. "We get what we create. You created a second chance today. I don't understand. When that pirate raised its weapon, you could have run to safety. Instead, you risked your life for mine." He gestured to his injured shoulder. "This would have been much worse without your intervention." "It was instinct," she admitted. "I didn't think." "Sometimes our truest nature shows when we don't have time to think," Marcus said. "Your first instinct was to protect, not to judge." A medical officer approached, indicating it was time for Ilara to receive treatment for her minor injuries. As she turned to leave, Marcus added, "By the way, I could use someone with your quick thinking on my diplomatic team. Someone who understands both human nature and ship operations. If you're interested." Ilara stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. "You want me to work for you? After everything?" "Sometimes," Marcus said with a small smile. "The people who learn the hardest lessons make the best teachers." 2 weeks later, at the Galactic Council's Grand Chamber, Marcus Chen began his first address as Earth's chief ambassador. Behind him stood his diplomatic team, including Ilara in a formal uniform that marked her new role as special advisor on interspecies relations. The chamber fell silent as Marcus stepped to the podium. Representatives from 27 spacefaring civilizations leaned forward to hear humanity's message. "Today I want to talk about fear," he said to the assembled aliens and humans, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "Not the fear we felt facing pirates, but the fear that makes us see enemies and friends. The fear that makes us judge others before knowing them. The fear that almost cost me my seat on the journey here, and nearly cost us all our lives." His eyes met Ilara's across the chamber. She stood tall now, no longer the frightened flight attendant who had tried to remove him from first class, but a woman who had found courage when it mattered most. "Humanity's greatest strength is not our technology or our determination, though both served us well against the Krulzar pirates," Marcus continued. "Our greatest strength is our capacity to overcome our fears and prejudices, to see beyond first impressions, to grow and change." The delegates murmured among themselves, some nodding in agreement, others watching with cautious interest. "But if we can overcome that fear," Marcus concluded, his gaze sweeping the chamber before returning to Ilara, "there's nothing we cannot achieve together." As applause filled the chamber, Ilara felt tears in her eyes. In that moment, She understood that true redemption wasn't about erasing past mistakes, but about creating something better from them. Something that might, someday, reach even beyond the stars.